There's a certain kind of hush that settles over an auction yard before the bidding starts. Part anticipation, part resignation. On the edge of a cold, dusty lot in central Texas, Jo Carter stood alone, hands shoved deep in the pockets of her faded jeans, her jaw set so tight it looked like it might shatter if she so much as breathed wrong. Her boots, scuffed and mud-stained, planted in place, as if moving an inch would mean surrender. She didn't have a cowboy hat or spurs, didn't swagger or spit tobacco. She was just there, another tired soul at the bottom rung of luck. The auction yard was the kind of place that smelled like old sweat, diesel, and desperation. Men and women gathered by battered railings, clutching their numbers, laughing at things that weren't funny. Most of them didn't even look up as the next lot rolled out. But Jo did. He limped into the pen, black as midnight, bones jutting under a tattered coat. Ribs poked through his skin like piano keys. Hips sharp as broken glass, one eye half closed, ears flat, step unsteady. A walking skeleton. The auctioneer called him a Mustang, but he looked more like the memory of one. People snickered. That thing ain't worth hay. Somebody call a glue truck. One of the handlers gave him a nudge, but he barely moved. Just stood there, head drooping, as if the weight of every mile he'd ever run was pressing him into the mud. Jo didn't flinch. She studied the horse, not with the cold calculation of a buyer, but with the haunted focus of someone looking for a lifeline in a storm. Maybe she saw herself reflected in those empty eyes. Maybe she saw her late husband, the one who'd gone to war and never come home. Or the patient she'd lost in the ER whose face still woke her in the night. Whatever it was, it hit her deep, hard, somewhere words couldn't reach. The auctioneer's voice was all business, slicing through the silence. Lot 39, Wild Mustang. Starting bid $50. Do I hear 50? Crickets. Come on, folks. He eats, he breathes. That's worth something. A laugh rolled through the crowd. Jo didn't wait. She raised her hand. 50. A man near the rail squinted at her. You serious, lady? You buying bones with a heartbeat? She ignored him. Inside, she could feel her own heart pounding. Half hope, half fear. The auctioneer grinned. We got 50. Anybody for 60? Nobody moved. The horse shifted, almost stumbling. The crowd lost interest, drifting to their phones, their smokes, their business. The auctioneer shrugged, brought the gavel down. Sold. Lot 39, to bidder 112. Jo exhaled. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and taking that first step, not knowing if you'll fall or fly. She handed over the cash, signed the receipt with a hand that shook just a little. The man with the squint shook his head. You just bought yourself a world of trouble, darlin'. Maybe he was right. But Jo didn't care. She moved toward the pen as the handler unlatched the gate. Up close, the horse looked worse. His eyes dull, his legs trembling, every breath a struggle. Still, he lifted his head as she approached. For a second, Jo saw something flash there. Defiance, maybe, or just plain survival. She spoke softly, voice cracking but steady. Hey there, fella. You're coming home with me. Not much of a home, but it's what I got. The horse didn't answer, but he didn't flinch either. She took that as a good sign. A battered stock trailer waited by the gate. As the handlers coaxed the horse forward, he stumbled, nearly going down. But Jo stepped in, hands gentle on his neck, steady as stone. Easy, boy. We're not in any hurry. The handlers rolled their eyes, but let her lead. It took nearly 20 minutes, but finally, the Mustang loaded. Jo climbed into the cab, hands gripping the wheel so hard her knuckles went white. The drive home was silent, save for the rattling of the trailer and the thumping of her heart. The road wound through the flat Texas plains, past fields gone to weed and fences sagging under the weight of years. Jo thought about turning back more than once, but each time she pictured the horse, the hollow look in his eyes, and she kept going. By the time she pulled up to the ranch, dusk was settling in. The place looked even sadder than she remembered. Barn with a caved-in roof, fields overgrown. The big oak by the porch dropping branches like tears. She glanced at the empty window. Leah would be inside, probably still mad, probably still blaming her for everything that had gone wrong. But tonight wasn't about her daughter, or her grief, or the memories that clung to the old house like dust. Tonight was about a horse who'd been given up on by everyone but her. She opened the trailer, let him out slow, talking the whole time, soft and steady. "Easy, it's okay, I've got you now." He limped down the ramp, pausing to sniff the air, ears twitching. For a second, Jo thought he might bolt, but he just stood there, as if unsure what came next. She led him to the old pen by the barn, grass knee-high, fence-patched and leaning. He dropped his head, nosing at the weeds, searching for something he could eat. Jo watched him for a long moment, arms folded tight against the night air. Maybe the folks at the auction yard were right. Maybe she just bought herself another heartbreak. But standing there, under a sky turning to bruised purple, she felt the faintest flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late, for him or for her. Inside, the porch light flickered on. Leah's silhouette stood at the window, watching, silent. Jo didn't wave. She just kept her eyes on the Mustang, whispering words neither of them fully believed. Yet. "We'll make it through this, you and me, one step at a time." They called him a broken horse. But Jo Carter was the one who needed saving. The first morning, back on her father's old ranch, hit Jo like a bucket of cold water. Sharp, bracing, and impossible to ignore. The sun crept over the horizon in streaks of pink and orange, but its light only seemed to highlight everything that was wrong. Out in the back pasture, what used to be green and alive was now just stubborn weeds and brittle grass. The house behind her, its paint peeled and porch steps sagging, seemed to groan with memories she'd never wanted to unpack. Jo rolled out of bed before dawn, boots on, face unwashed, hair pulled back in a hasty knot. No matter how heavy the grief pressed on her chest, the chores wouldn't wait. She'd been an ER nurse for over a decade. She knew what it meant to keep moving, to put your own hurt on ice for the sake of someone or something else. Inside, the house was still. Too still. The kind of still that makes you hyper-aware of every creak, every shift in the walls. Leah's door was closed tight. Jo paused in the hallway, knuckles poised to knock, but let her hand drop. No use pushing. 12-year-old girls had a way of building fortresses, and her daughter had bricked herself in months ago. Out in the pen, the Mustang, her Mustang, she reminded herself, stood as a shadow in the breaking light. He was even thinner in the morning, the harsh daylight revealing every ridge and hollow in his body. He barely acknowledged her, just shifted away, one ear flicking in her direction, the other trained on the nothingness beyond the fence. Jo let herself into the pen, slow and deliberate, careful not to crowd him. She brought a bucket of oats and set it down a safe distance away. The horse didn't move, didn't sniff, just stared, stubborn and silent, a black shape pressed against the edge of his world. She tried to remember how her father used to do it, coaxing wary horses with a patience she'd never learned. Back then, her world had been the city. The constant buzz of ambulances, the metallic taste of adrenaline, the endless cycle of wounds that could be stitched up and those that couldn't. She had run from this place, from its slow pace and open spaces, and now it felt like the land itself was watching her, waiting to see if she'd measure up. A few minutes later, she heard the front door slam, the sound echoing across the yard. Leah stomped out, backpack slung over one shoulder, hair wild, eyes red-rimmed and angry. She didn't say a word, just pushed past Joe with a glare sharp enough to draw blood. "Morning, Leah," Joe tried, her voice soft, careful, as if any sudden movement might send her daughter running. Leah didn't answer. She ducked around the pen, keeping as much distance between herself and the horse and her mother as she could. She shot a look at the Mustang, eyebrows drawn. "Why'd you even bring him here? He's gonna die anyway." Joe flinched, not at the words, but at the coldness in them. "He needed a place," she said, not sure if she was talking about the horse or herself. "We all need somewhere." Leah rolled her eyes, the gesture painfully adult. Dad never would have brought home something that broken. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Joe watched her daughter stalk toward the battered pickup where the school bus would stop at the edge of their dirt road. She wanted to call after her, say something, anything, that would bridge the chasm between them. But the words stuck, too raw, too late. She turned back to the Mustang. "Looks like it's just us, buddy." The day dragged. Joe spent hours patching fence lines, sorting through the barn. Her father's old tools rusted and scattered, dust thick on every surface. She found his battered work gloves tucked behind a can of linseed oil, and for a second she pressed them to her face, breathing in a smell that was almost, but not quite, familiar. She thought about him often these days, the way he'd stand in the doorway, arms crossed, half a grin on his face as he watched her try, and usually fail, to ride as a kid. He died 3 years ago. Heart just stopped. She hadn't come home for the funeral, too tangled up in her own pain, in her husband's last deployment, in the hospital shifts that blurred into one another until grief became a routine. It was only after her husband Mark had been killed, one roadside bomb in a place Joe couldn't even pronounce, that the silence grew so loud she couldn't ignore it. Then the patient, a little boy, lost under her watch on a rainy night, his mother's scream searing Joe's brain forever. She'd tried to outrun the memories, but they followed her no matter where she went. Now the ranch was the only place left, a last-ditch effort to fix what was broken, if not in her, then maybe in Leah, or maybe in that bag of bones standing in the pen. She checked on the horse at midday. He hadn't touched the oats, just stared off into the distance, muscles twitching under his skin. Flies crawled over his haunches, but he didn't even swish his tail. Joe cleaned his water, added fresh hay, tried to coax him closer. Nothing. She sat on the bottom rail of the fence for a while, just watching, the heat pressing down until sweat rolled down her back and soaked her shirt. By evening, the wind picked up, rattling the old windmill and sending clouds of dust skittering down the drive. Joe stood on the porch, mug of black coffee in hand, eyes on the horizon. Inside, Leah clattered dishes in the sink, her anger still sharp, still fresh. Joe wanted to go in, wanted to break through, but something stopped her. Maybe fear, maybe exhaustion, maybe just the knowledge that healing, real healing, doesn't come all at once. That night, after Leah went to bed with her door firmly shut, Joe stepped outside again. She walked out to the pen in the moonlight, the world gone silver and silent. The Mustang raised his head as she approached, eyes shining in the dark. For a moment, Joe stood there, hands in her pockets, heart thudding. She spoke softly, voice swallowed up by the night. "I lost a lot before I found you, you know. Maybe we're both running out of second chances." The horse didn't answer, but he watched her, and Joe thought, just maybe, he understood. Inside, the house creaked. The ghosts of old laughter and new wounds swirling in the dark, but for the first time in months, Joe didn't feel quite so alone. The next morning started with an anxious quiet that pressed in on Joe from all sides. The sun hadn't fully risen when she woke, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was that same sixth sense she'd honed in the ER, an alertness that whispered when things were about to go wrong. She pulled on her boots, shrugged on a jacket, and headed out, the kitchen clock blinking 5:43 as she slipped through the door. Outside, the Texas air was sharp, tinged with dew and dust. The sky was barely blue, a few stubborn stars still holding on. Jo made her way toward the Mustang's pen, her steps crunching in the gravel, her heart tapping an anxious beat. She could barely make out his shape in the dawn. He stood motionless in the far corner, legs splayed awkwardly, as if every muscle was protesting. She tried to coax him with a quiet, "Hey, boy," holding out the bucket of feed. He didn't move. Jo stepped closer, keeping her voice low and steady, but his ears flicked back, and his nostrils flared. Then, without warning, his front legs buckled, and he crashed to the ground, ribs heaving. For a split second, Jo's ER instincts screamed at her, "Act now! Don't freeze!" She dropped the feed and hurried into the pen, not caring about the mud or the morning chill. "Easy, easy," she murmured, kneeling beside him. His sides shuddered with each labored breath. She pressed her palm to his neck, feeling the tremor in his skin, the rapid, uneven pulse. She remembered every patient who'd gone still like this. Some she'd saved, some she hadn't. But this time, there was no medical chart, no beeping monitors, just raw instinct and a fierce refusal to lose anyone else. Jo stroked his mane, untangling bits of burr and dirt. "You're not going anywhere, not again." Her voice broke on the last word, but she didn't pull away. She looked him in the eye, and for a second, the horse stared back. Something fierce flickering in his gaze. A will to survive, battered but not broken. She remembered a medal her husband never got to wear. Mark Carter had been the bravest man she'd ever known, but courage doesn't always get rewarded. Sometimes it's just the thing that gets you through the next day. Jo pressed her forehead gently to the Mustang's neck and whispered, "Valor." The name came out small but certain, a promise. "That's you now, Valor. We're in this together." The horse was too weak to protest. He lay there, sides rising and falling. Jo stayed with him, brushing away flies, murmuring bits of nothing, anything to let him know he wasn't alone. She remembered her father telling her years ago that sometimes a horse just needed someone to keep vigil through the dark. So she did, minute by minute, as the sun rose and the ranch came to life around them. By the time Leah stumbled outside, sleepy and scowling, Jo was still kneeling in the mud, jeans soaked, hands filthy, but she didn't care. Leah stood by the fence, arms crossed, silent. She watched her mother for a long moment, something uncertain flickering across her face. "He's going to die, isn't he?" Leah asked, voice brittle. Jo shook her head. "Not today." She didn't know if it was true, but she said it anyway. "He's a fighter." She looked at her daughter, searching for a crack in her defenses. "So are you." Leah didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. For a moment the world paused, the only sounds the distant hum of a truck, the soft snuffling of Valor's breath. When Valor finally struggled to his feet, Jo stayed beside him, hands at his shoulder, guiding him to water. Every step looked like agony, but he kept moving. Jo filled his trough with fresh, cool water and watched him drink, slowly at first, then with desperate gulps. "See?" she said softly, almost to herself. "We're not done yet." Afterward, she cleaned him up as best she could. She brushed his coat, working gently over the jutting bones, untangling his mane, careful not to pull. She spoke to him as she worked, telling him stories about the ranch, about her father, about the things she wished she could say to her husband and her daughter. Valor listened with those dark, wounded eyes, never moving far from her reach. Inside the house, Leah drifted from room to room, a ghost in her own right. She avoided the kitchen when Joe was in it, kept her headphones on, barely spoke a word. But every now and then Joe caught her peeking through the window, watching Valor limp across the yard or nuzzle at the fence. There was something softer in her gaze, something that looked a lot like hope, but it was fleeting. The rest of the day was a blur of chores and memories. Joe fixed broken boards, dragged hay bales from the old barn, made list after list of repairs and vet bills and things she couldn't possibly afford. But every hour or so she checked on Valor, making sure he was still standing, still fighting. At sunset, Joe sat on the porch, exhausted but unwilling to give in. She watched Leah toss a stick down the driveway, anger simmering just below the surface. Joe knew that look. She'd worn it herself for months after Mark's death, after every loss that left her hollow and untethered. She wanted to reach out, to explain why she'd brought the horse home, why she refused to let go of things everyone else called hopeless. But the words stuck, so instead she let the silence stretch between them, thick and unbroken, as the sky bled from gold to purple. That night, Joe checked on Valor one last time. He was standing under the old oak, head bowed, mane tangled, but there was a new steadiness in his stance, a stubborn refusal to fall. Joe smiled, weary but grateful. "We're not quitters, you and me," she whispered. "Not now, not ever." As she turned back toward the house, she saw Leah at her window watching. Joe raised a hand, just a small wave. Leah hesitated, then almost imperceptibly nodded back. Inside, Joe hung her jacket by the door, kicked off her boots, and let herself hope, just a little, that the worst was behind them. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight Valor was still standing, and that was enough. Days passed, but progress with Valor felt painfully slow. Joe kept to her promise, tending the Mustang with quiet determination, never rushing, never raising her voice. Each morning, she'd slip out to the pen with a handful of sweet feed, a bucket of clean water, and a patience born of heartache. Still, Valor met her with wariness in his dark eyes, flinching when she reached for his halter, backing up, teeth bared if she got too close. Trust, Joe realized, wasn't something you could force. It was earned, inch by inch, in the quiet moments when you kept showing up. One muggy afternoon, the air thick with the threat of rain, Joe decided to move Valor from the run-down pen into the shelter of the old barn. The skies had darkened, thunder rumbling low on the horizon, and she couldn't bear the thought of him left exposed. She coaxed him along with a mixture of soft words and carrot slices, heart thumping each time he balked. He refused to be led, so Joe let him set the pace, always a step behind, hands open, never reaching unless he let her. Inside the barn, the smells of hay and dust and old leather clung to the air. The storm broke just as Joe closed the big doors behind them, rain pelting the tin roof in an angry drumbeat. Valor tensed, ears snapping back, nostrils wide as he took in the unfamiliar sounds. Joe let him settle in one of the larger stalls, the wood worn smooth by decades of horses before him. She tried to brush him, but he sidestepped, throwing his weight against the boards. Suddenly, like a switch had been flipped, Valor lashed out. He kicked at the stall wall, hooves thudding hard enough to rattle the hinges. He wheeled and struck, his body a blur of panic and muscle. Joe ducked back, pressing herself against the barn door, heart hammering. He spun, nostrils flaring, eyes wide with fear. Every instinct screamed at Joe to run, but she stayed, voice steady even as her hands shook. "It's okay. It's just the storm. You're safe in here." She repeated it like a mantra, softer each time until her voice was swallowed by the rain. Valor paced, tail lashing, biting at the air. Once he snapped in her direction, teeth bared, a warning to keep her distance. She gave him space but didn't leave, letting him see she wasn't a threat, just a witness to his pain. Hours ticked by. Outside, the world was a blur of lightning and water. Inside, the barn was alive with Valor's rage, a violence born not of cruelty but of terror. Joe recognized the look in his eyes. She'd seen it in soldiers returned from war, in patients waking up from nightmares they couldn't explain. She knew better than to take it personally. Pain needed an outlet. Some wounds didn't heal, they just learned how to breathe. Eventually, Valor crashed to his knees, sides heaving, foam flecking his lips. Joe waited, then stepped forward, slow and cautious, kneeling in the straw. She reached out, fingers trembling, and rested her hand on his neck. He didn't flinch. For a long time, neither moved. Just two broken creatures waiting out the storm together. Leah watched from the far end of the barn, her silhouette a shadow behind the bales of hay. She was supposed to be inside, but the yelling had drawn her out, curiosity warring with fear. Joe saw her daughter's eyes, wide, uncertain, but not entirely cold. Leah stayed back, her body pressed to the wall, as if afraid Valor's anger might spill out and sweep her away too. After a while, Joe managed to get Valor's head up out of the mud, holding it steady so he could breathe. The rain leaked through cracks in the roof, splattering their shoulders and pooling in the straw. Joe ignored it. She stroked Valor's trembling neck, whispering nonsense. "You're safe. You're here. You're not alone." She wasn't sure who she was reassuring, him or herself. When Valor finally went still, his chest rising and falling in slow, exhausted waves, Joe stayed with him. The barn was quiet now. The worst of the storm passed, the air thick with the scent of wet hay and sweat and something else. Hope, maybe, or just relief. She looked up and caught Leah's gaze. For a heartbeat they just stared at each other, no words needed. Leah's anger softened just a little, replaced by something that looked like understanding. Joe knew better than to push. She gave Valor one last pat and backed out of the stall, moving slow so he wouldn't spook. She washed her hands in the rainwater collecting by the barn door, her mind replaying every second, the wild thrashing, the fear in Valor's eyes, her own helplessness. She'd seen rage before, but never like this. Not so raw, not so close to her own. Later that night, as the ranch lay still under a sky scrubbed clean by the storm, Joe sat at the kitchen table, staring at her reflection in the window. She thought about all the things she'd tried to outrun. The ghosts of the ER, the sharp ache of Mark's absence, the empty space between her and Leah. She wondered if healing was possible for people as battered as her, or for a horse like Valor. In the dark, she heard footsteps. Leah hovered in the doorway, hair tangled, eyes shining with uncertainty. "Is he okay?" Leah's voice was small, hesitant. Joe nodded, her own voice rough. "He's tough. He'll make it." She wanted to say more, to tell Leah how proud she was, how much she missed the closeness they used to share. But some bridges take time to rebuild. Leah lingered, then crossed the kitchen to pour herself a glass of milk. She stood quietly for a moment, then asked, Did he hurt you?" Joe shook her head. "He's just scared. Sometimes when you're hurt bad enough, you push everyone away, even the ones who want to help." Leah stared at the floor, turning the words over. "He's not the only one," she said, barely above a whisper. Joe's heart twisted. She wanted to reach out, but she didn't. Instead, she offered a smile. A real one, the first in a long time. "We'll both get there. Just gotta keep trying." That afternoon, Buckley kept his word. He found Leah hiding behind the barn, earbuds in, lost in a world of her own. He introduced himself with a simple, "Name's Buckley. I worked for your granddad." Leah just stared, sizing him up. I got a pony that's gentle as they come, Buckley said. Ever led one before? Leah shook her head, skeptical. He shrugged. That's all right. Pony doesn't mind if you're new. Against all odds, Leah followed. Buckley led her to a stout little chestnut mare, her mane tangled but her eyes kind. He handed Leah the lead rope, showing her how to stand, how to move slow, how to talk in soft tones horses understood. Leah rolled her eyes but followed along, her movements stiff at first, then gradually loosening as the pony snorted and bumped her for treats. Joe watched from the barn, heart swelling. It wasn't a miracle, not yet, but it was a start. For the first time in ages, Leah let herself smile, just a flicker, before shoving her hands in her pockets and looking away. Buckley shot Joe a wink, as if to say, "See? Not so hard." The sun dipped low, painting the ranch in copper and rose. Buckley dusted off his hat, collected his biscuit tin, and headed for his truck. "I'll be back in a few days," he promised, pausing at the gate. "Keep an eye on that one." He tipped his hat toward Leah. "And the horse, too." Joe nodded, gratitude thick in her throat. "Thank you, Buckley, really." He waved her off, climbed into his pickup, and was gone in a swirl of red dust. That night, Joe lingered at the window, watching Leah braid the pony's mane under a lavender sky. The sound of their laughter floated back to her, soft and uncertain, but real. In the barn, Valor stood calmer, watching, listening, a silent witness to the slow stitching together of something lost. Joe leaned against the glass, the ache in her chest eased by hope. Maybe, with a little help, they all stood a chance. A few days after Mr. Buckley's visit, the world at the Carter Ranch seemed to shift. Maybe it was the change in the air, a teasing hint of rain, the heat less punishing than before. Or maybe it was something softer, less visible. The first thread of hope quietly weaving itself through all their hearts. Joe woke with a nervous energy she couldn't explain, rising before the sun to check on Valor. Each day she followed the same ritual, a slow approach, bucket of sweet feed in one hand, quiet words tumbling from her lips. But this morning, as dawn painted the barn in pale gold, she noticed a subtle change in the horse's stance. He didn't bolt or pin his ears as she entered. He simply watched, wary but not angry, his head cocked, the faintest curiosity shining in his eyes. She knelt by the edge of his stall, setting the feed just close enough. "Hey, boy," she whispered. "Big day, huh?" Valor sniffed the air, nostrils flaring. He hesitated, eyes flicking from Joe to the bucket and back again, muscles taut with indecision. For a long minute, nothing happened. Then, slow as a sunrise, he took a step forward. Another. He lowered his head and nibbled, the tension in his body easing with every bite. Joe barely breathed. She stayed perfectly still, every muscle aching from the effort not to reach out, not to rush what was unfolding between them. After days of rejection and outbursts, this moment felt miraculous. She watched as Valor licked the last oats from the bucket, then, astonishingly, stood still as she reached out and brushed a hand gently over his neck. Her fingers trembled as they traced the coarse hair along his mane, untangling knots and bits of old hay. Valor flicked an ear but didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into the touch, eyes half closed. And for a heartbeat, Joe could swear she felt him exhale. She smiled, a wide, genuine smile that seemed to lift a little of the heaviness from her chest. Behind her, the barn door creaked. Leah poked her head in, curiosity overpowering her resolve to stay distant. She stopped, surprised, watching her mother and the Mustang from a safe distance. Joe glanced back, pride coloring her voice. "He let me touch him, Leah. He finally let me." Leah eyed the horse warily. "He's not going to bite, is he?" "Not today," Joe replied, her voice soft but strong. "Come see." Leah hesitated, then inched forward, her movements careful. She watched as Joe continued brushing Valor's mane, each stroke smooth and deliberate. When Joe handed her the brush, Leah looked startled but took it, her hand shaking just a little. She reached out, and Valor tensed, but this time he didn't flinch away. He simply watched, as if giving her a chance to prove herself. Leah brushed lightly, lips pressed tight in concentration. After a few strokes, Valor dropped his head, and a small amazed smile broke across Leah's face. "He's letting me do it," she breathed. "He really is." Joe nodded, eyes shining. "He knows you're not here to hurt him. Animals can tell." For the first time since they'd come back to the ranch, Joe and Leah stood together, side by side, working in quiet partnership. It wasn't a magical fix. There were still walls between them, built from grief and words unsaid. But it was something real, a start. As the morning wore on, Leah became more confident, running the brush along Valor's flank, humming under her breath. When Joe stepped back to watch, she caught sight of Mr. Buckley leaning against the barn door, arms crossed, a faint grin on his weathered face. "Told you he'd come around," he said, not unkindly. Joe laughed, her voice light. "He's stubborn. Most good ones are." Buckley beckoned to Leah. "How about you try leading that pony again, Miss Leah?" Leah grinned, handing the brush back to her mom. "Sure." She gave Valor a final pat before following Buckley to the paddock, where the chestnut mare waited. As Leah practiced walking the pony around, Buckley gave gentle instruction. How to hold the rope, how to speak in tones the animals understood, how to notice the little signs of trust or fear. Joe watched her daughter with a mix of pride and longing. It struck her how much Leah looked like Mark. Same stubborn chin, same quick, defensive scowl that tried to hide her tenderness. Joe's heart ached for all the time lost between them, for the hugs never given and the comfort never shared in the aftermath of Mark's death. When Leah finished with the pony, she returned to the barn, cheeks flushed, a new energy in her step. "Mom, can I help with Valor's water?" she asked, surprising them both. Joe nodded, hiding her delight. "Absolutely." They filled buckets together, sharing an easy silence that felt more precious than words. As they worked, Leah broke the quiet. "Do you think he remembers where he came from?" Joe looked at the horse, who now stood calm, eyes gentle, mane soft from their efforts. "Maybe, but I think what matters is where he's going now." Leah considered this, then nodded, reaching out to touch Valor's muzzle. He leaned into her palm, his breath warm against her skin. "I think he knows you're hurting too," Leah whispered. The words landed between them, fragile and honest, and Joe felt tears prick her eyes. She put an arm around Leah's shoulder, pulling her close. For once, Leah didn't pull away. Outside, the sky had brightened, a gentle breeze ruffling the grass. The ranch still needed work. Fences to mend, bills to pay, wounds to heal. But for this moment, everything felt possible. By midday, Valor was following Joe around the pen. No halter, no rope, just a slow, trusting walk. He would stop, look back, wait for her to catch up, then nudge her shoulder as if to say, "Come on, keep up." Leah watched, awe and laughter mingling in her eyes. Later, as the sun dipped low, Joe sat on the porch with Leah, sharing stories about her father and Mark, about the old days when the ranch was alive with horses and laughter. Leah listened, asking questions, letting her defenses drop. And out in the field, Valor stood tall, mane catching the last golden rays, eyes bright. He wasn't whole, not yet, but there was a flicker of trust there, a promise of better days. For Joe and Leah, it was enough to believe in. For now. The news arrived on a slip of paper tacked to the grocery store's corkboard. A faded flyer, corners curled, ink nearly gone. From the Brink, Mustang Showcase, a celebration of recovery and second chances. This Saturday, no entry fee. Joe spotted it while picking up grain, her mind busy with bills and a mental checklist a mile long. She would have ignored it. Another small-town event, another thing she didn't have time for, if not for the words scrawled at the bottom. No saddles, no reins, just trust. She tore the flyer from the board, feeling a jolt in her chest. On the drive home, she turned the idea over and over. Valor was coming along, yes, but was he ready for this? Was she? The last thing Joe wanted was to parade their brokenness for the whole county to see, but the thought of showing Valor, not as a prize winner but as a survivor, tugged at her in a way she couldn't ignore. That night at dinner, Joe laid the flyer on the kitchen table between her and Leah. There's a showcase in town this weekend. It's not a competition, just a chance for people to see what rescued Mustangs can do. I was thinking maybe we could take Valor. Leah looked up from her phone, her expression wary. You mean, like, in front of people? Joe nodded. Yeah, no fancy tricks, just walking beside him, showing what he's learned. She kept her voice steady, careful not to push. You could come with me, or just watch if you want. Leah picked at a chipped spot on her nail polish, not looking at her mother. I don't know. What if he freaks out? What if everyone laughs at us? Joe felt that fear too, the weight of every sideways glance, every whispered judgment. But she also remembered Valor's trembling body letting her brush him, Leah's small hand on his nose, the way the horse followed her across the pen with nothing but a word. It's not about them, she said, voice soft but certain. It's about showing Valor how far he's come, and maybe showing ourselves, too. They sat in silence for a while. Eventually, Leah shrugged. I guess we could try. The week rushed by in a blur of nerves and preparation. Joe spent hours brushing Valor until his coat gleamed, working burrs from his tail, gently trimming his hooves. She walked him up and down the driveway, practicing stops and turns with just a soft cluck of her tongue. Some days he was perfect, responsive, attentive, calm. Other days he shied at a shadow or froze at the wind in the trees, muscles bunched and eyes wide. Joe learned to breathe through it, steady and patient, never forcing, always asking. Leah surprised her by helping out, leading Valor on short loops around the paddock, talking to him in a low voice. She was awkward at first, embarrassed when Buckley caught her at it, but she stuck with it, slowly gaining confidence. Sometimes Joe caught her laughing at something the horse did, a snort, a head toss, a nudge for treats, and for those moments, the heaviness in Leah's eyes lightened. By Saturday morning, the whole ranch felt different. Joe was up before dawn, pacing the kitchen, double-checking the trailer and making sure Valor had everything he needed. Leah appeared in the doorway, hair brushed, boots on, a hint of excitement in her stance. You nervous? Joe asked, pouring coffee with a shaky hand. Leah rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. He's gonna make us look dumb, isn't he? Joe grinned. Only if I let him. They loaded Valor into the trailer. No drama, no fuss. The horse walked up the ramp with a calmness that still surprised Joe. She closed the gate, took a deep breath, and climbed into the truck. Leah slid in beside her, silent but present, her presence enough. The town fairgrounds buzzed with activity when they arrived. Trailers lined up, families bustling about, banners flapping in the breeze. Joe felt the old anxiety bubbling up. The same fear she'd felt in hospital waiting rooms, at Mark's funeral, even in the auction yard. But she glanced back at Valor, standing steady in his stall, and forced herself to focus. Inside the big tent, the announcer called for the showcase to begin. The rules were simple. Each handler would walk their Mustang into the arena, no saddle, no bridle, just a lead if needed. The crowd was a mix of horse people, curious neighbors, and kids clutching popcorn. There were whispers, a few snickers at the scrawniest horses, but also applause for every team that stepped forward. Joe's number was near the end. She waited by the gate, Leah at her side, both of them holding their breath as the teams ahead performed. Some horses danced and spun, others balked or bolted. A couple refused to budge at all. Joe felt her stomach twist with each performance. When their turn came, Joe unclipped Valor's lead, heart hammering in her chest. She glanced at Leah, who gave her a tiny brave nod. "You got this, Mom." She stepped into the arena, Valor at her side. The world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. Joe spoke softly, "Walk with me, boy," and took her first step. Valor followed, head low, ears flicking nervously. The crowd went quiet, expecting disaster. Joe led Valor in a slow circle. At first, he hesitated, but she kept her voice gentle, her pace steady. Halfway around, Valor stopped, eyes darting, body tense. Joe waited, breathing in time with him, refusing to pull or prod. After a long, silent moment, Valor stepped forward again. Slow, deliberate, but sure. They finished the circle and turned toward the exit. As they reached the gate, Valor paused, then did something that stunned everyone. He dropped his head into Joe's lap as she knelt beside him, blowing out a long breath. The arena erupted in surprised applause. Joe felt tears burning in her eyes. She looked up and saw Leah standing, clapping wildly, her face alight with pride. In that instant, all the doubts, all the pain, faded away. Afterward, as they waited for the results, a volunteer pressed a ribbon into Joe's hand. Quiet courage, for the bond that can't be taught. She held it up for Leah to see, laughter and tears mingling as the crowd celebrated them, not for perfection, but for perseverance. That night, driving home under a sky full of stars, Joe glanced at Leah, asleep in the passenger seat, Valor calm and dozing in the trailer. She felt something deep inside her finally loosen, the belief that they didn't belong, that broken things couldn't be mended. In the darkness, Joe whispered, "We did it, Mark. We really did." The Carter Ranch might still be battered, the future uncertain, but tonight hope was real, and sometimes that was all you needed. The quiet courage ribbon from the showcase hung over Valor's stall, fluttering in the late spring breeze. Leah had tacked it there herself, her face beaming as she recounted every moment to Joe for days after. How Valor hadn't bolted, how Mom's hands didn't shake, how they stood in front of all those strangers and showed the world what real trust looked like. For once, the Carter Ranch felt alive again. Neighbors dropped off homemade pies and bags of carrots. Even the mailman stopped by just to say, "Heard you," and that black Mustang turned some heads. Joe allowed herself to breathe a little easier. The ranch was still in rough shape. Fences sagged, the roof leaked in 3 different places, and the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen table grew taller each week, but something in her chest felt lighter, less burdened by regret. She noticed Leah laughing more, lingering at the breakfast table, telling stories about Valor as if he were a little brother and not a half-wild animal they'd rescued from the brink. Still, late at night, Joe's anxiety crept back in. She'd lie awake listening to the coyotes howl and the old pipes groan, calculating just how many months she had left before the bank called in the loan. She made lists, things to sell, jobs to apply for, ways to stretch every dollar. Some days, hope and exhaustion braided together so tightly she could barely tell them apart. 3 days after the showcase, everything changed. It started like any other morning. Joe was mucking stalls while Leah fed Valor treats, both of them humming the song that had become their private ritual. A truck rolled up the drive, sleek, polished, tires so clean they barely kicked up dust. Joe recognized the logo on the door before the man even stepped out. Briar Ridge Stables, a high-dollar operation on the other side of the county. Joe set her shovel aside, the muscles in her neck tensing. A man climbed out, dressed in boots that had never seen mud and a button-down so crisp it caught the sun. He was maybe 40, tan, clean-shaven, with mirrored sunglasses that reflected everything but revealed nothing. Leah wrinkled her nose and drew closer to Joe. "Morning," the man called, smile just shy of friendly. "I'm Logan Pierce. I run Briar Ridge." Joe nodded, arms folded across her chest. "Heard of it. I watched your Mustang at the showcase. Impressive animal." His gaze drifted past Joe to Valor, who grazed nearby, coat gleaming, black mane rippling in the wind. "That's a rare kind of connection you two have. The kind you can't buy, at least not usually." Joe said nothing. She'd met men like Pierce before. Charm slick as oil, interest measured in dollar signs. He continued, "I'd like to make you an offer. $120,000. Cash, I'll handle transport, vet checks, the works. You wouldn't have to lift a finger." Joe's heart lurched. She tried to keep her face neutral, but her hands balled into fists at her sides. That kind of money could erase her debts, fix the roof, maybe even save the ranch for another year. For a split second she pictured Leah riding new horses, the barn alive with rescued foals, the fields green again. Then she glanced at Valor, who lifted his head and watched her with those steady, knowing eyes. Leah, sensing the tension, spoke first. "You can't sell him, Mom. He's not for sale." Pierce's eyes narrowed. That horse could have a real career. He could win, he could be famous. With my team, he'd have every chance. He paused, voice low and persuasive. "You've done good work here, but it's time to let a professional take him to the next level." Joe bit the inside of her cheek. She remembered the day she'd bought Valor for $50, the laughter of the auction crowd, the way his ribs stuck out like fence rails. She remembered the nights she'd sat in the mud, holding his head out of the muck, the look in Leah's eyes as she reached out for him the first time. This was more than a horse. He was a lifeline, a mirror for everything she and Leah had fought through. "I appreciate your offer," Joe said, her voice even but strained, "but Valor's not for sale." Pierce smiled, all teeth. "Think about it. You got my number." He handed her a card, white, glossy, embossed with silver. Joe took it without looking, her hands shaking just a little. That night, Joe sat at the kitchen table, the card burning a hole in her pocket. The bills stared back at her, demanding, relentless. She ran the numbers 100 ways in her head. It wouldn't just pay off the ranch. It could buy Leah a future. College, freedom, safety, all the things she'd promised and never delivered. Leah found her there, hunched over the table, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. "Are we in trouble?" Leah asked, voice barely above a whisper. Joe hesitated. She could lie, say things were fine, brush it off as grown-up stuff, but she was tired of lies. "We're behind, baby, it's hard, and what he offered, that's a lot of money." Leah's face crumpled. "If you sell him, it's like selling me. He's part of us." Joe reached for her daughter's hand. "I know, but I also have to think about you, about this place. Sometimes I don't know what the right thing is." Leah wiped her nose with the back of her hand, fierce. "Don't let him take Valor, please, Mom." Joe squeezed her hand. For a long moment she stared at the wall, memories swirling. Mark's voice, her father's, her own broken promises. Finally she shook her head. "I couldn't sell myself back when I was broken. I'm not about to sell him now." Her voice cracked, but there was steel in it. Leah flung her arms around her mother, sobbing into her shirt. Joe held her tight, letting the tears come. In that embrace, Joe felt the hard, true weight of love, the kind that refuses to let go, no matter what the world offers in exchange. The next day, Joe called Pierce, her voice steady. "Valor stays with us." Pierce was silent for a beat. Then, cold and clipped, "You're making a mistake." Joe hung up, heart pounding. Maybe she was. Maybe the ranch would fail. Maybe she'd have to sell everything but this moment, this choice, this bond. But when she walked out to the barn and Valor whickered softly at her approach, she knew some things are worth more than money. Some promises can't be bought or sold. And for Joe and Leah, that was enough. The weeks after Joe turned down the offer from Briar Ridge felt heavier and lighter all at once. On one hand, the weight of the bills, the leaky roof, and the uncertainty about the ranch's future grew sharper. On the other, Joe felt a new kind of pride every time she looked at Valor and at Leah, a pride that ran deeper than any ribbon, trophy, or dollar sign. There was no more talk of selling the Mustang. The family's unspoken rule was simple. If they were going to save anything, they would do it together. Word spread about the Quiet Courage ribbon, and soon a letter arrived, handwritten in looping script. It was from the Tri-County Mustang Trials, a respected, sometimes intimidating annual competition that drew horse lovers and trainers from 3 counties. The letter read, "We saw what you and Valor did at the showcase. We'd like to invite you to enter the trials. All levels welcome. Registration fee waived for rescued horses." Joe hesitated. The trials were legendary. People came with horses worth tens of thousands, months of training behind them and reputations to maintain. Joe didn't know if she belonged. Valor was still skittish some mornings, and there were days when Leah wouldn't speak at all, just stomp through chores in silence. But Leah surprised her. She read the letter 3 times, then said, "We should go. We can show them what Valor can do, what you can do." Joe tried to protest. "We're not ready. Not like those others." Leah cut her off. "They don't know him like we do. He's got heart, Mom. So do you." That simple faith lit a fire in Joe. She sent back the entry form. For the next 2 weeks, the ranch was alive with preparation. Buckley came by every other day, offering advice, patching fence boards, and, most importantly, telling Leah stories about her granddad's days at the trials. Leah began helping with Valor's training, her voice firm and gentle as she walked him through patterns in the field, practiced leading, and worked with Joe on the kinds of obstacles they might face at the event. Crossing a tarp, stepping over logs, backing through cones. Valor stumbled sometimes. He'd freeze if a dog barked or if someone cheered too loud. He refused a water crossing one day, bolting sideways so hard Joe landed in the mud. Leah laughed so hard she nearly fell. But instead of getting frustrated, Joe got up, wiped her jeans, and started again. "We're not quitters," she said, flashing a grin at her daughter. Finally, the day of the trials arrived. Hot and blue-skied, the kind of Texas morning that promised dust and sunburns. The fairgrounds were even busier than at the showcase. Trucks and trailers from all over lined the fields. Horses gleamed like burnished bronze in the sun, their handlers moving with confident, easy grace. Joe felt her old insecurities gnawing at her as she guided Valor out of the trailer. Compared to the polished competitors, he was still rangy, his coat glossy but his body bearing the marks of old starvation. But his eyes were bright, his movements light, and when Joe ran her fingers through his mane, she felt the steady thrum of trust running between them. Leah held Valor's lead rope as Joe registered. She wore her favorite boots, a faded ball cap, and her Quiet Courage ribbon pinned proudly to her shirt. She shot Joe a thumbs up, grinning. The first event was an obstacle course. Nothing fancy, but designed to test the partnership between horse and handler. The crowd was big, spilling over the fence rails. Joe watched as other teams worked their way through. A young woman with a dappled gray who spun perfectly around cones. A boy no older than Leah guiding his palomino across a rickety bridge without a hitch. When it was their turn, Joe's heart hammered in her chest. She took a deep breath and stepped into the ring with Valor. At first, everything went right. He followed her cues, walking calmly, stopping when she stopped, turning with a soft word. But halfway through, a stray dog barked near the crowd, and Valor startled, dancing sideways, snorting and wide-eyed. Joe paused, took a breath, and waited. She didn't yank or yell. Instead, she touched his shoulder and whispered, "It's okay, buddy. We're still here." Valor's ears flicked back to her, and after a moment he stepped forward. They finished the course slower than most, but with every step, Joe felt the bond between them grow stronger, unshakable, unbreakable. Next came the free work round. No lead, no halter, just handler and horse together in a round pen. Joe swallowed her nerves. She'd never done this in public, never with people watching her every move. But when she stepped inside and called Valor's name, he trotted over, stopped right in front of her, and dropped his head into her hands. The audience murmured, impressed. Joe walked, Valor at her side, and when she jogged, he jogged too, mirroring her as if connected by an invisible line. The final event was Limitless Spirit, a prize for the horse and handler who inspired the crowd most, regardless of ribbons or technical scores. It was up to the judges, who watched not for perfection, but for heart. Joe and Valor waited nervously as the judges tallied results. Leah squeezed her hand so tight Joe thought her fingers might break. "No matter what, I'm proud of you, Mom," she whispered. Names were called for, first and second place. Neither was Joe's. Then came the final announcement. The Limitless Spirit Award goes to Joe Carter and Valor. The crowd erupted, and Joe felt her knees nearly buckle. Leah shrieked and ran straight into her arms, burying her face in Joe's chest. For the first time in years, Leah's hug was tight, fierce, unguarded. No walls, no resentment, just pure love and pride. Even Buckley had tears in his eyes as he slapped Joe on the back. "Told you that horse was special," he said, voice thick. Joe let herself soak it in. The cheers, the hugs, the feeling that, for once, she and Leah belonged. They hadn't come to win, but to show the world what healing could look like. And somehow that had been enough. On the drive home, the award sat between them on the seat, a tangible symbol of everything they'd worked for. Leah kept touching it, running her fingers over the inscription. Joe glanced over, smiling. "You know, kiddo, we did this together." Leah grinned, tears shining. "No, Mom, we all did. Me, you, Valor, and even Grandpa, I think." Joe's heart ached in the best way possible. She reached for Leah's hand, and together, under the vast Texas sky, they drove home. Not just as survivors, but as a family rebuilt. That night, Joe hung the new ribbon beside the Quiet Courage one. Valor grazed quietly in the paddock, stronger than ever. Leah hugged her mom one more time before bed, lingering in the doorway. "I love you, Mom," she said, voice soft but sure. Joe smiled through happy tears. "I love you too. Always." Outside, the ranch was quiet, but it was no longer broken. In the darkness, hope was everywhere. Summer bled into autumn at the Carter Ranch, bringing cooler mornings, skies brushed with orange, and a gentle hush that settled across the land. The transformation wasn't sudden. A barn doesn't fix itself overnight, nor does a heart. But if you looked closely, there were signs everywhere that something had changed for good. The biggest change was the new life buzzing around the old ranch house. The Limitless Spirit and Quiet Courage ribbons hung side by side on the kitchen wall, their colors bright in the morning sun. Leah made sure they stayed dust-free, her pride impossible to hide. But what Joe was most proud of wasn't the awards. It was the laughter that now echoed through the halls, the sound of music from Leah's room, and the sense that, for the first time in a long time, their home was truly alive. After the trials, Joe knew she wanted more than survival. She wanted purpose. The idea came to her late one night as she sat on the porch, Valor grazing quietly in the field, Leah's lamp still glowing upstairs. She remembered something her father used to say: "You don't fix what's broken by turning your back on it. You roll up your sleeves and get to work." The next morning, she called Buckley. "I'm thinking about starting a rescue and riding program here," Joe said, nervous but determined. "For kids who've had it rough, like Valor, like us." Buckley didn't miss a beat. "About damn time, Joe. Your daddy would have been proud." Within a month, word spread. Joe put up flyers in the feed store and at the library. She spoke to the school counselor who knew all too well which kids needed a place to belong. Soon, a handful of children started coming out each weekend. Some quiet, some angry, all of them carrying invisible burdens. Joe welcomed them with a warm smile, a safety helmet, and the promise that no one here was too broken. Leah, to Joe's surprise, dove in head first. She became the unofficial assistant, teaching the younger kids how to brush the ponies, how to lead them around the paddock, and how to trust their own instincts. She took special care with a girl named Maya, who barely spoke above a whisper. Week after week, Leah showed her how to braid Valor's mane, how to feed him slices of apple from her palm, and how to rest quietly in his shadow on hard days. Maya began to smile, then to laugh. The other kids followed suit. The barn became a sanctuary. Mr. Buckley showed up every Saturday with a tin of homemade biscuits, coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and advice that was never unwelcome. He fixed fences, taught kids how to swing a lasso, and shared stories that grew taller every year. Under his watchful eye, the place seemed to run smoother, and Joe found herself depending on his steady presence more than she'd admit. Joe's days grew full. There were still problems. Money was always tight, and some mornings she woke with panic buzzing under her skin. But the dark, lonely weight of grief had loosened its grip. She saw it in Leah, too. Her daughter moved with more confidence, laughed more easily, and met Joe's gaze without flinching. They shared late-night talks on the porch, voices soft in the darkness, conversations about Mark, about Grandpa, about how it hurt and how it healed. One weekend, a reporter from the local paper showed up, drawn by the word of the ranch's new mission. She snapped photos of kids riding ponies, of Leah teaching Maya how to clean a saddle, and of Joe leading Valor across the field with no rope, just a gentle hand. The article's headline made Joe laugh and cry at once: "Rescued Mustangs help heal broken hearts at Carter Ranch." The calls started coming in, parents wanting to volunteer, neighbors offering donations of hay and supplies, even an old friend from the hospital sending a check with a note: "For your next second chance." Joe pinned the note to the fridge, where she could see it every morning. Autumn deepened. The rescue program grew. Leah organized a Halloween pony parade for the kids, complete with costumes and a bonfire. Maya dressed Valor as a superhero, complete with a red cape, and giggled as he pranced around the ring, clearly enjoying the attention. For the first time, Joe heard Leah sing, really sing, as she led the kids in campfire songs under the stars. Some evenings, Joe found herself lingering by the window, watching as Leah and the other children helped Buckley bring the horses in for the night. She'd see Leah pause, arms thrown around Valor's neck, whispering secrets into his mane. The sight filled Joe with an overwhelming gratitude, a recognition of how far they'd all come, and how much further they could go. One crisp morning, Joe saddled up Valor for a sunrise ride. Leah joined her on the chestnut mare, and together they rode through fields streaked with gold. The world was quiet, except for the rhythmic clop of hooves and the occasional snort of contentment. As they reached the ridge that overlooked the ranch, Joe reined Valor in and sat quietly. "You okay, Mom?" Leah asked, her voice gentle. Joe nodded, eyes stinging with unshed tears. "I'm more than okay. I'm grateful. I didn't think we'd ever get here." Leah smiled. "We did it together, you, me, and Valor." They rode home in companionable silence, a sense of peace blanketing them like the morning mist. As the seasons turned, the Carter Ranch continued to heal. There were hard days, sure, days when old pain crept back or something broke that they couldn't afford to fix. But now they faced those challenges as a team. Joe was no longer just surviving. She was building something lasting, something good. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Joe leaned against the fence and watched Valor gallop across the pasture, his mane flying, muscles rippling, the very image of strength reborn. Leah joined her, slipping her hand into Joe's. "He looks happy," Leah said. Joe nodded. "He is, we all are. Turns out, I didn't just rescue a horse. I rescued myself." They stood together, mother and daughter, hearts stitched together by the hard work of healing, surrounded by laughter, hope, and the thunder of hooves. Turns out, she didn't just rescue a horse. She rescued herself. You don't throw something away just because it's wounded. Healing doesn't come all at once. It comes when you stay, even when it hurts. Sometimes, the quietest victories matter the most. Like if you believe second chances are worth fighting for. Share if you've ever loved something back to life. Subscribe for more true stories where healing comes in hooves and hope.